Thank you, Mr. Kitoni. My first question is just to do with your role with the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And you have been credited for reviving it and putting in place some transformative initiatives to make sure that it becomes much more competitive and is fulfilling its mandate effectively. So we just want to know, what is the role of the Chamber of Commerce in Kenya? And what are some of the transformative activities and initiatives that you've put in place to ensure that it's fully functional and it's functioning in accordance with its mandate? And then in terms of its role on the international stage, what has been some of the deliverables of the Chamber of Commerce for Kenya on an international regional stage, and how have you managed to make it achieve its role? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tendai. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you today and to share some of the experiences that I've had. I joined the Chamber leadership in 2012, and I was privileged to be the president of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce for 2 terms, spanning a total of 7 years. And I found an organization that was literally on its knees and completely dysfunctional, unable to deliver on its mandate, and not giving any services to its members. And from 2012 onwards, together with a team that I was in leadership with, we recreated the entire architecture of the Chamber of Commerce in Kenya. Starting from the value proposition to members, we developed a bouquet of services for members, and we created a service charter for all the members. We developed very good governance with a 3-tier structure with a secretariat, a board, and on top of that, a trusteeship that is today seen as a paradigm in terms of good governance. We work closely with several development partners, including the Center for International Private Enterprise in Washington, D.C., and others, and we created a framework that I think, in my opinion, is built to last. The main services of Chamber of Commerce organizations is advocacy and networking. So we developed our skills in terms of advocacy, and the Chamber of Commerce in Kenya has been at the forefront of advocating for a good business environment for businesses, and especially small and medium-sized enterprises. We also have been at the very forefront in terms of creating a capability for networking. The Chamber of Commerce partnered with the government of Kenya in international diplomacy, economic diplomacy, and we led several delegations to many parts of the world. In fact, at the end of my tenure, I did a tally of the number of countries that I had the privilege of visiting, and including what I had done before then, I have been able to visit 77 different countries, and that's been quite something for Kenya, because we've been able to take our goods, our services, our success stories to the globe, very much so. One of the other very, very important roles of the Chamber, particularly on the international platform, is arbitration. The International Chamber of Commerce, headquartered in Paris, is the #1 arbitration facility in the globe. And we are now, the Chamber of Commerce in Kenya, now under the leadership of Richard Ngatia, is working towards creating a strong arbitration center here that will be able to provide for solutions in terms of alternative dispute resolution. Thank you.
27 countries that you have worked with. Can you give us 2 or 3 examples of where you feel like Kenya has benefited significantly in terms of deliverables? What are some of the outcomes of some of the engagements that you've had, as an example, so that at least we can learn, from Kenya's experience, on the global stage with regards to the role and mandate of the Chamber of Commerce. And we have been grappling with the role and the effectiveness of our relationship with China from a Zimbabwean perspective. What role do you think China has played for you guys? And do you think, what's the extent of the relationship and the quality of the relationship with China, between China and Kenya? Would you consider China to be your most important ally, for example, in Kenya? And what kind of engagement do you have with China that you think benefits the greater good, as opposed to just individuals or political elite, as has been perceived in my own country as well?
Very, very interesting questions. In the 7 of the countries that I was able to travel to and interact with at a very close level in the trade missions that I attend and some of the business forums, I think one of them would be the 2 Latin American countries. Well, let me say 2 of them. That is Colombia and Argentina. And these 2 countries were quite inspiring to me, because I saw the way they have used their own homegrown research and development solutions to become some of the global market leaders in some of the things that they produce. Colombia has been a great success story where coffee is concerned, and they have been able as a country to develop a very good strategy where the county governments or their provincial leadership governments are providing solutions to farmers and smallholders at the very, very local level and building brands, whereas their national government has focused on pushing the Colombian coffee as a leader in global coffee production. So I like the model that they have adopted because it allows for a lot of participation. It has built a very strong brand in the globe. And I noted the same in Argentina, where they've done an exceptionally good job with their beef animal value chain. I mean, they've used homegrown solutions, homegrown genetics, homegrown ways of producing some of the best beef on earth. And I would say we've been able to, using the platform of the Chamber of Commerce, develop memorandum of understanding with both government and non-governmental agencies in both Colombia, Argentina, and in Kenya. So we have a very effective transfer of knowledge in terms of those value chains. At the moment, I'm trying to get a memorandum of understanding between the county government of Transoya, where my own coffee farm is, with the province of Pereira in Colombia, so that way we are able to develop global best practice from them. The question on China is very interesting. I think that we cannot run away from the fact that China has been the greatest contributor of foreign direct investment, not just to Kenya, but to many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. In Kenya, China has been behind the deployment of some of the amazing infrastructure that you see today deployed in the city of Nairobi, the airports, the ports, and even the super highways that we are seeing in deployment. However, a lot has been said about China and the terms in which they lend out their money. I wouldn't want to use this platform to go into that conversation, but then it is a subject of global concern and global debate, particularly the Belt and Road Initiative that China is currently in the process of implementing. And many nations are now asking, is it to the benefit of the countries where the Silk Road will be going to, or is it to the benefit of the humongous Chinese economy? There is a lot to be learned from China. I mean, how it is that they rose like a phoenix, they rose from the ashes to become the significant. It would be interesting to see where this conversation on China will be going to, and particularly what the future holds. But I think that what is important is that we need to increase the negotiating capacity of our bureaucrats and our business people to be able to handle the very, very capital-intensive Chinese approach and the very aggressive way in which they have been able to penetrate Africa. So China is a significant partner for Kenya. But again, we are treading with a lot of care now, particularly looking at some of the contracts that have been signed in the past. There's been a big debate about whether the SGR rail system that we have was at the best price. But again, that's a conversation for another day. Thank you.
Now, going to your role with the World Chamber Federation representing Africa, and you're the vice chair at the moment, what is the standing of Africa on the global stage, where chamber and commerce and trade and markets are related? Do you think that there is leverage and there is traction that we can get as Africans on the global stage? Do we think we compare? Do you think we've got a voice? And I see that in humanitarian and development sectors, for example, our representation on UN Security Council and all those kind of things, we're not even on the top 5 on the primary members of the UN Security Council, as an example. We're not even present on the G8, and it goes on like that. And there is just a global perception that our leverage is quite limited and all that. Do you feel and do you think that, in terms of your involvement with the World Chamber, do you think that Africa has got any traction? And then the second thing is, what is the extent of research and development? You mentioned research and development. I think that's what's lacking in the wake and advocate of advent of of COVID-19, we saw that, we've just been on the receiving end, of COVID vaccination and everything else, because we haven't really done much, in terms of research and development institutions in Africa. Does Kenya have this? And are there any plans? What are some of the lessons that you've learned so far in terms of involvement at that level? Thank you. So just in terms of the role of the diasporans, just in relation to your response there around that, what are some of the strategies that you're using? I see Ghana has managed to institute a very interesting approach to bringing back Ghanaians and even Ghanaian celebrities in America, and hordes of them have actually been going there since probably 2018, 2019, thereabout. What are some of the approaches that are being used in terms of strengthening the role and the voice of diasporans, Kenyan diasporans? And are there any incentives that are being put forward? And to what extent are they leveraging on the expertise that's dotted around the different countries of Kenyans and all that? So what's the relationship? What's the symbiotic relationship between the diasporans and the government? And are there any intentional efforts by the government to ensure that they're benefiting getting in the voice, the role, the skills, and the capacities of the Kenyans that are in diaspora?
Actually, to be very honest, there hasn't been a very clear, deliberate strategy. It's only the last 3 or 4 years, and particularly during the time that we got to travel to many parts of the world with our president to visit Kenyans in the diaspora, did the government start to develop a more formal way of engagement with the diaspora. The one thing that I note for sure is that Kenyan diasporans are very aspirational, and they actually do want to come back home. Many of them do not settle permanently in the countries where they are domiciled at the moment, and many of them harbor the desire to come back home to Kenya to participate in national development. And for that reason, there's quite a lot of investment that comes back here, either through formal means and informal means. So I wouldn't say that there has been a very clear and deliberate strategy, but it is just one of those things that we have a diaspora that is very rooted to its country of origin. Regarding the position of Africa, in global trade and investment, I wouldn't say that we have a very high seat on the table. I mean, Africa contributes only 2% of global trade and 4% of global investment. We don't at all trade a lot with each other. In fact, intra-African trade is a measly 15% compared to, for example, intra-EU trade. And I said it once in a business forum that I attended in Harare, that one of the unfortunate truths about Africa is that despite over 50 years of independence, we have very, very poor linkages, infrastructural linkages between our countries. Our trade routes are hardly developed sufficiently to enable us to trade effectively with each other. We have very poor sea linkages, very poor rail networks, and even road networks. I mean, 50 years after independence, we hardly have, good sea route between West Africa and East Africa, South Africa and North Africa. So that in itself presents a very huge challenge. And if you look at the way Africa was constructed, it was really looked at more as a source of primary produce for the developing Western world during the Industrial Revolution. So it's something that our leaders need to address, and I'm glad that they've taken that bold step of signing on to the African Continental Free Trade Area. Regarding China, I mean, we cannot ignore the fact that China is a major contributor of foreign direct investment. And Kenya is one of the major recipients. We've got many roads, highways, airports, rail links that have been developed by Chinese FDI. Now, it's a big question, and it's a pie in the sky about whether or not China is a friend of Africa. But we cannot ignore the fact that they've made very significant investment, in fact, post the Cold War. And they have really risen to the occasion. And it's only now that we are seeing many of the Western powers coming back to Africa to try and support the development agenda of many of the fledgling nations of Africa. But the jury is still out about Chinese capital, Chinese foreign direct investment. And I think one of the things that we certainly must do is to improve our ability to negotiate with powerful Chinese capital. Otherwise, we might find that we will always get the short end of the stick. So the jury is out. I wouldn't want to give a verdict on that, but for sure, China has played a significant role in terms of deploying infrastructure in Africa. Thank you. The World Chamber Federation is a global World Business Organization. It's also called. It's part of the International Chamber of Commerce, and it has its headquarters in Paris, in France. It is noteworthy that the chamber movement began in the year 1599. So the chamber movement is about 422 years old this year. So many of these chambers were formed as part of the endeavor of nations then to trade with other nations. And chambers were formed by traders, merchants, and seafarers to expand the reach of countries that were, starting to manufacture and produce things, and they were looking also for accessible raw materials. The ICC today has a seat on the UN General Assembly. Is very influential in terms of tariff negotiations, in terms of providing arbitration globally, and in terms of just creating an environment that is sustainable for business. The chamber movement globally, through the ICC, are aligned to the Global Compact as well as the Oslo Business for Peace Awards, is highly involved in fair trade and in ensuring that we do have an enabling environment for nations to trade with other nations.
Be able to comment on the public transport strategy. I say this in the context of the matatus, which were quite problematic for you in the previous years, but you seem to have somehow worked around it. What is the public transport strategy that you have used to make your transport systems efficient so that you can attract foreign direct investment? And in terms of rail, in terms of infrastructure development and rehabilitation, in terms of your strategy and plan going forward, and also the capitalization, who has been capitalizing there's and who have you which one of the countries have you been allying with? Is it just China, Japan? Who else have you been working with as well? I also wanted to find out about Kenya Airways, and it's and I know that it has faced its own fair share of troubles, but you've managed to keep it on air and all that. Would you recommend that we privatize Air Zimbabwe as an example? And what are some of the strategies for ensuring that we expand our airline services in Zimbabwe? Here we've got some people on the platform who own, and who've run and who manage airlines that would be interested in hearing your comments around how to make air traffic more efficient as well. Thank you. Moving on to the issue of media. I know that you have been a chair of the Media Owners Association, and it's an advocacy group that has been quite effective. I've managed to visit Radio Africa Group with Mr. Kwaku, and he's absolutely amazing. And the work has been really, really fantastic. There's been opening up of the airwaves, and just the media sector is quite vibrant, and you've got some really amazing personalities and all that. But I wanted to find out, how have you managed, and what could be your recommendation in ensuring that we open up our media services to private players and the capitalization of these institutions as well? What would be your advice to Zimbabwe? At the moment, we've got the national broadcaster and some of the institutions that are part owned by the government, but also some that are privately owned that are also doing well, and all that. But we still have a very small and constricted space for media at the moment, and then it's difficult for journalists, and we have a number of journalists actually here on the platform as well. We've got journalists that are quite passionate and well experienced and all that, but that are hungry to actually go out and work, but there isn't much on that. So what is your advice, just with regards to opening up the media space and ensuring that there's multiple players that are much more independent and all that as well? Please share with us your farming experience, which is quite vast. I even grow goosebumps when I start talking about your farming experience and some of the crops that you've been growing. And how have you managed to get to get such a vibrant commercial farming experience and acumen? And what is the approach to getting markets? How does Kenya in general terms establish markets beyond the Kenyan borders, within Africa to begin with, but then going out? What are the approaches for ensuring that? What are some of the approaches that the government has made? Here in Ireland, for example, the Irish farmers are very, very strong in terms of their lobby. If Irish farmers say this is not going to happen, the country will come to a standstill because they've got a very strong lobby voice from that perspective. So the government makes sure that they're exempted on certain taxes, and they have managed to really do a lot of lobbying, and there's a lot of incentives for farmers and all that. So what is the approach? What has made Kenya so successful in its approach to farming? Please tell us what crops you're growing, and where do you sell your products, and what's the value chain for your agro business? Is it just you growing, but also maybe you grow and then you can and then you send to markets? What exactly do you do? Please, can you share with us that experience? We've got a lot of farmers, by the way, here on the platform that would be very happy to gain from your experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tendai, for those questions. Again, very interesting questions. Again, I'll qualify my response and say I'm not an expert in aviation, but I have a fair amount of business experience and knowledge. I serve as the chair of the Nairobi Securities Exchange, which is the largest stock market in the Eastern Central African region. And I'll also render some opinions that are sort of informed by being in that role, because we are, we mobilize capital for both enterprise and for government. Let me start by saying that, our public transport policy has not been as successful as it should be. Like many developing nations, we have very, very fast growing urban population, quite a significant urban poor population who today depend on matatus. They also depend now on boda bodas. This is, motorcycles. And in fact, the cities in many parts of our country are quite a mess today because of, these boda bodas, as we call them, the motorcycles. And I've always said, and I'll repeat it again, that many of these transport modes are actually a manifestation of a failed public transport policy. And I want to say, in fact, Harare, Zimbabwe when I visited Harare twice, I was greatly impressed that your public transport seems to be much, much more organized than many nations across Africa. However, it would be fair to say that under the leadership of our last two presidents, President Mwai Kibaki and President Uhuru Kenyatta, we've seen a huge investment from the public sector in infrastructure. And right now, that we are working on an RBT, Rapid Urban Bus Transport System. There's many efforts are being done. Superhighways are being deployed. And I do believe that in the years to come, we are going to see a far, far more effective and more efficient public transport system that will also ensure that services and goods are able to be transmitted far more efficiently than they have in the past. Now, on the issue of Kenya Airways has struggled a lot, and in fact, lately the partnership with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines came to an end. And as I talk to you today, Kenya Airways is primarily owned by the government of Kenya and a consortium of local Kenyan banks like Equity Bank and Kenya Commercial Bank. Public transport has been a struggle. I mean, they haven't been able to do very much in terms of profitability. You've seen Kenya Airways, South African Airways, and others have not done very well. I would say perhaps the most successful airline in this region is Ethiopian Airways, which operates on slightly different principles. But I would hasten to say that the aviation industry, particularly during the COVID era, has greatly suffered. And in Kenya, for example, the only reason why Kenya Airways continues to fly is because it is today underwritten almost 100% by the government of Kenya. At the Nairobi Stock Exchange, we have bonds. Most of them are public sector bonds, trading to the value of about 25 billion US dollars. So we are able to mobilize quite a lot of resources for both public and private sector. Thank you. Thank you again, Tendai, for those very, very interesting questions, and I shall try to respond to both of them. The first one being on the media. Yes, I am the founder chairman of Radio Africa Group, and I'll convey to Patrick Kwaku your message about his prowess. And actually, it is true that he's been able to put several brands into this country that are, really have captured the imagination of the youth and many other demographies in this country and farther beyond. I want to say with no fear of contradiction that media goes hand in hand with good democratic credentials. A liberalized media works well for a democratic society. And my encouragement is to the Zimbabwean governments to try and liberalize as much as they can the media. Obviously putting in place the relevant controls and regulations to safeguard the youth, for example, from wrong messaging and etc. But in Kenya, it's been very successful. Probably 80-90% of our media is in private hands. There's very strong competition. And the one thing that's happening in media today is that there is a shift in technology. I mean, a lot of media has gone to social today. It's no longer on the traditional old media platforms that we knew in the years gone by. So the sooner you start the journey towards liberalization, then the sooner also that you catch up with what's going on in the rest of the world in terms of how it is that you can actually start to participate in the global discourse. Media also provides a good avenue for the exchange of ideas. It gives a good avenue in the selection of leadership through democracy. It gives a good avenue for knowledge transmission and etc. But when it is public sector controlled, a lot of these benefits are actually lost. So my message to that on media is quite clear. Let's liberalize media. Is good for everybody. It's good for its shareholders. It's good for business, and it's good for the flow of good ideas. Thank you. On the side of agriculture, I got into, I was brought up in an agricultural family. My father was a farmer, albeit not as commercial as the approaches we've taken today. There's a big similarity between Kenya and Zimbabwe because a lot of our prime agricultural lands were actually in the hands of British farmers before independence. When Kenya gained independence in 1963, a program began called the Million Acre Scheme that transferred 1 million acres from the colonial masters to African farmers. Now, this came with its own challenges because there was a lot of land demarcation, and land demarcation leads to less productivity and etc. But by and large, I think Kenya has been quite successful in terms of being able to maintain some of its value chains like coffee and tea, horticulture, macadamia, and others where even cut flowers, where I think we are the second largest producer of cut flowers in the planet. And today I think the challenge remains, how do we scale this? How do we infuse more scientific methodology? How do we use our water resources better for farming? How do we increase our mechanization, as well as embrace technology, research and development to really be amongst the best players in the world? I think there's a big opportunity not just for Kenya, but for even other countries. One of the things that I was most impressed about in Zimbabwe is when I came in there, it was a few years back, and it was just soon after Mugabe had left power, and I walked into your supermarkets, and I think I remember mentioning to you, Tendai, that I was very impressed that despite the fact that Zimbabwe had gone through such a challenging period, a lot of the manufactured foodstuffs in the supermarkets were produce of your own country. I won't mention names because I don't want to start a debate, but there are other much stronger African economies where if you visited, you will find that even their own butter is imported from as far afield as Australia. I think to me, what we just need to do is improve our infrastructure, improve our linkages, improve our bilateral trade, transact more with each other, and really scale agriculture as it should be. And there's a lot to be said about agriculture. Right now, I'm focusing on value addition. I grow coffee on my farm, and last year, we were able to produce the second best parchment of coffee in the country. And I also grow tea. We've got both black tea and purple tea. Purple tea as organic has health benefits. It is an antioxidant, and it's very popular. We've been able to also introduce some agro-tourism in our farm, and it's quite interesting. And the one thing about agriculture is, yes, agriculture is good, but it's not an easy way to make money. But then the benefits for participating in agriculture are far greater than money, because you get a lot of satisfaction from being able to impact on your environment positively through development of agricultural activities. Thank you.
How has Kenya dealt with the land question? I know that it's an election issue. You've got an election coming along at the moment. I'm sure it's going to be one of the issues on the campaign trail for a lot of politicians. The land issue, are you able to probably detail for us? Because I think, maybe one of your winning factors in terms of your agriculture has to do with, how you've tackled and dealt with the land question in general. So what are some of the land issues in Kenya, and how have you dealt with them, and what do you think you have done well to make sure that at least the land ownership issue is resolved and it is delivered to the most needy of your society in general. And what is your relationship with some of the regional countries, like, for example, Rwanda? What are some of the bilateral relationships in terms of the MOUs that you've signed up with countries like Rwanda, like Angola, and all those countries that are quite oil rich and those that are doing well economically and all that? What is the nature of those relationships, and how have they been working well?
The question of land is an interesting one in the sense that Kenya, came from a background where the land issue was a very, very emotive issue, and having had to take over the land from the colonial masters in the 1960s to where we are today. I mean, there's been a big transformation through the years. Our legislative development has also focused a lot in making sure that we have a land tenure that promotes the active use of the land. In fact, our latest land ordinance is actually one that punishes very much the holding of land for non-commercial use. So it's something that's evolved over the years. But what I think informed the fact that we had perhaps a more stable transition is our first president, Jomo Kenyatta, was very pragmatic in his approach to land. Kenya, where some of our neighbors like Tanzania went very much the socialistic way, Kenya took a more capitalistic approach. So the weaning away of the colonial masters and the transfer of land to Kenyan owners, took a period of maybe almost 20 years. And it wasn't done absolutely. I mean, there are still many farmers who are of British descent who continue to dominate and hold substantial pieces of land, particularly the tea plantations in Kericho. But the land issue is one that continues to evolve. And I think it's one that we've probably done quite well in terms of having been pragmatic and at the same time ensuring that there has been no disruption of our productivity. And perhaps the greatest challenge that we see today is the fact that many of the land parcels are now today going through a lot of subdivision, and that in itself affects productivity. The relationship with our neighbors is cordial. Kenya is a member of the East African community. It is also a member of COMESA. So we have ascribed to the tariff arrangements that these trading blocks bring together. However, all these will be superseded with the full operationalization of the AfCFTA. And obviously with countries like landlocked countries like Rwanda and Uganda, we continue to be a useful sea link for them. But Rwanda is a country that I want to really highlight has been having done exceptionally well in terms of how they have organized themselves. It's not a very large economy, but they have been able to really show the way in terms of organization, in terms of capability, in terms of focus. And we work very closely with them, and we look forward to years ahead where Kenya will be a useful member of the AfCFTA as well as the regional trading blocks that I hope one day will all be just swallowed up into the AfCFTA.